Good morning, everybody. My name is Brenna Moore. I'm the chair of the theology department here at Fordham, and I have to say what a joy it is to look in this room and to see so many community leaders, leaders in faith communities, activists, Fordham professors, graduate students. This to me is really what the university can really be all about, coming together for discussion and inspiration on matters of urgent importance to us all. So happy to be included. Thank you for organizing and for coming to Fordham. And it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague and friend, Father Bryan Massingale. Bryan is a Catholic priest in the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, and he's also the James and Nancy Buckman Professor of Theological and Social Ethics at Fordham in the Theology Department, and a senior fellow in its Center for Ethics Education. Dr. Massingale has authored 2 books and more than 200 articles, book chapters, book reviews, and his monograph, Racial Justice and the Catholic Church, received a first-place book award from the Catholic Press Association. And let me just also say on a more personal note, Professor Massingale is a scholar activist who enriches the lives of so many of our undergraduate, graduate students, community members around the world, faculty members, and especially we are so grateful to have him with us here at Fordham and in the Catholic Church, offering clarification of thought, but also inspiration for so many of us who are trying to create a more inclusive and just world. So we're so grateful to have him with us here at Fordham, and we look forward to hearing from him today. And he's going to be speaking for about 20 minutes and then 10 minutes Q&A. So it's my pleasure to welcome Father Bryan Massingale. Thank you.
Good morning. We can do better than that. Good morning. Thank you. It's good to be with you, and thank you again for your commitment, your activism, your work that you're doing. It's a joy to be with you. And let me also then thank you for your heroic and courageous work that many of you are doing on behalf of those who are being marginalized, erased, even disappeared from our public life. And many of you are doing this at great personal cost. Many of you are spending long days, sleepless nights. Many of you are suffering from physical exhaustion, from spiritual fatigue, and many of you are also dealing with physical threats as well. Let's bring all that and name it. And you don't often hear words of appreciation and gratitude. So for those of you who don't, this is your slide. My 2 cents. Thank you. Thank you. Now, I'm not known for pleasantries or making people laugh. That's not my reputation. That's not my strong suit. So turn to each other now and say, it ain't gonna be easy. I know he means to turn and do that, yeah. You gotta tell professors, you see, you can tell this. The activists in the room do exactly that's not how to be a little community. Academics are like, you mean I've talked to each other? And no, yeah, it ain't gonna be easy. I'm going to have to say some very difficult truths about why we are where we are. And so it's not gonna be easy. Let's see, it's not working. Not working. Yeah, it's one moment. I don't know how Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount without. Try it. Yeah. Huh? There we go. Great. So the theme for the gathering is hope in a time of peril, or as I talk about it, a sense of dread. We're always living with the sense that we don't know what's going to happen next. And so how can we speak of hope in a time of peril? And so I want to make 4 points. I want to first talk about the need for an intersectional approach to immigration justice. That we cannot talk about, we truly be effective in our advocacy for immigration justice if we're not honest that it's also a racial issue. Immigration is a racial issue, and we need to be honest about that. Then I want to talk about rethinking what do we mean and who do we mean by church beyond the USCCB? Because another thing I want to bring into the room is that sometimes we're always kind of frustrated with the fact that our bishops aren't saying enough or doing enough. Now, some are, but some aren't. The corporate body aren't. And I want to talk about why that's the case. Then I want to talk about where do we go from here? And I want to really move through the first two sections kind of quickly, although I won't, because I talk about this stuff all the time. But where do we go from here? What are we called to do? And then to end on some reflections on hope, what sustains me as I'm living in this time of peril and dread? So that's the beginning, the middle, the end. We're going to try to do it in 20 minutes, so we have some time for Q&A. So that means let's get started. Each of these, by the way, deserves its own paper. So I'm just going to give you bullet points and headlines. I'm not going to make a detailed argument. And so let's get started. So immigration is a multifaceted reality that is a commonplace way of saying intersectional. Academics talk about intersectionality all the time. It means looking at things not in silos, but seeing the deep connections between different issues. We need to think and act intersectionally because our enemies already are. Now, some of you are saying, oh my God, we don't have enemies. Well, look, Jesus wouldn't tell us to love our enemies if we didn't have them. Okay, so let's be honest, we have enemies in this fight. So let's talk about how intersectional they are so we understand how intersectional we need to be. We are up against an ideology, and that ideology has a name, and the ideology is called white Christian nationalism. White Christian nationalism has many different understandings, but the understanding I'm using is this. It is the non-rational, instinctual, visceral conviction that this country, its public spaces, its institutions, its cultural heritage, that these belong to white Christians and especially white Christian straight cisgendered men in a way that it does not and ought not belong to others. That's what we're up against. And white Christian nationalism is not primarily a matter of hate. It's a matter of belonging and identity. It's a matter of whose country is this? It becomes hate when that normative sense of belonging is threatened. And then it can indeed become violent. I'm using this slide here where I'm talking about America first. We hear that phrase a lot. That phrase has a history. And by using that phrase, people today are hearkening back to a day where that normative whiteness was unquestioned. That's what they want to bring back. We need to be honest about this. Now, the extent to which white Americans espouse this worldview has been studied, especially by the Public Religion Research Institute in a study known as A White Nation Under God. In 2023 and again in 2025, they sought to measure the extent to which white Americans agree with statements such as, you see that on a slide, God intended America to be a new promised land where European Christians could create a society that could be an example to the rest of the world. America was divinely ordained to be a place for white comfort. Now, they found that 30% of all Americans agreed with that, including an almost equal number of white Catholics. Let's keep that in mind. But what gives this such much political power is that this ideology is concentrated in one particular party, the one that's in charge, and also in a particular religious community, white evangelicals, who are also particularly concentrated in one particular party. It's also important to understand that this ideology of white Christian nationalism is a multifaceted reality. That if you are committed to this reality, you're also committed to anti-LGBTQ sentiment, anti-immigration sentiment, misogyny, terror, it's support anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and support for political violence. Adherents to this worldview believe in the Great Replacement theory, this understanding that immigrants are invading, being an infestation, poisoning. I'm using deliberate words here, but this is the discourse that's there. You hear it, you know it. Let's bring it into the room and talk about it. No Jesus there. We're not done with Jesus yet. We'll see him back again. Nationalism represents a nostalgia for a longing for a lost world, a world that is under siege, the loss of a certain kind of understanding of America. The noted scripture scholar Walter Brueggemann, who recently passed away, talked about the fact that a certain we, have lost the capacity to maintain our kind of America, that kind of America that's populated solely by white neighbors, led by males, limited to heterosexuals. And that dimension of loss touches every dimension of our common life, and it's often too painful to acknowledge. But that loss, if it's unacknowledged, if it's unmourned and unprocessed, has dangerous effects. Because in the next sentence, Walter Brueggemann prophetically concludes, sadness over loss that is unvoiced, unembraced, unacknowledged, A, turns to violence, and B, precludes movement toward new possibility. The inability to face the fact of our changing America and our changing demography leads to a pain that is unprocessed, unnamed, unmourned, and when it does, it becomes violent. What does that have to do with immigration? Senator Padilla, Mexican-American descent, a US senator, was forcibly removed from a conference that was a news conference being conducted by members of the Department of Homeland Security. And the reason why was that because he looked like an illegal. We need to understand that in America, whiteness is not primarily a skin color. Whiteness is a social status. Whiteness is a social status. It's a social construct of political, economic, cultural privilege, advantage, preference, and power. And the boundaries of whiteness are fluid and constantly contested in our society. Immigrants have gone, and throughout our history, have gone to court arguing for the right to become white. And some of them have been succeeded, and some of them have lost. Some folks who weren't white have become white. If you're Irish, you weren't white when you came here, and you're now white. If you're Greek American, you didn't become white until the 1940s. And if you're Mexican, you were white until the 1930s. You're saying it doesn't make any sense because it's not about skin color. And immigration has always been a racial issue. Who can be included within the boundaries of whiteness is an essential question underlying the immigration debate. And if we cannot or will not face that fact, then our advocacy for immigrant justice is always going to be limited and ineffective. Now, what's this got to do with God? Oh, good Lord. When the cardinal this morning was talking about the vision of Isaiah, about how the foreigners are now being welcomed, I don't think our Department of Homeland Security got that memo. Because the Department of Homeland Security is actively recruiting members to join ICE, and they're using religious imagery to do it. One particular video that they now have, at their protest, that you can see the videos up, and now they've kind of put everything on mute, basically has a group of militarized white Homeland Security agents in a helicopter using night vision goggles, going after migrants, going after immigrants. And then the voiceover says, and I asked the Lord, who will go for us? And I said, here I am, send me. This is not the only video that is using biblical verses to justify what's happening. The implication is clear that God is baptizing, supporting the actions of our current administration to restore and maintain America as a divinely ordained place for the comfort of whites. We have to be intersectional, because the used Catholic language, white Christian nationalism, patriarchy, and xenophobia are a seamless garment, a consistent ethic of intolerance and hatred. I got turned on the Venn diagrams when I took philosophy as an undergraduate. They're one of the strongest reasons for keeping it in the core curriculum. When you make a Venn diagram of white Christian nationalism, anti-LGBTQ sentiment, homophobia, xenophobia, misogyny, there is a disturbing overlap. As I told you, it ain't gonna be easy. Second, we need to rethink who and what we mean by church, because the corporate body of bishops is slow to move on immigration justice. Now, let me hesitate to say, there have been and are efforts. The bishops, as state conferences, as individuals, are doing heroic work. Is Bishop Seitz here in the room? Bishop, thank you for your ministry. Thank you. He's also one of the few bishops that actually cite me by name in his pastoral letters. So thank you so much. I appreciate that. But we also need to understand that the voice and the witness of the bishops' conference as a whole has been restrained, muted, and anemic, especially given the magnitude of the crisis. Note the difference of passion and priority that the Bishops' Conference as a whole gives to migration and immigration, as opposed to the passion, the organization, the effort, and the money they put into opposing the Affordable Care Act and their fortnights for religious liberty. We know how to make a splash when we want to. Why is this the case? Two reasons. The first is the Catholic Church in America is its own self-understanding of itself as a white institution. And when I say that, I mean that there is a pervasive belief in the Catholic Church in America that it's European aesthetics, European music, European theology and persons, and only these that are standard, normative, universal, and truly Catholic. Yeah, you Black Catholics need to clap and use gospel music in your church, but we don't do that at the cathedral. No, I was told that. That means because of our normative self-understanding as being a place for white European comfort, note the overlap between how the Catholic Church in the United States understands itself and how the country understands itself, at least according to the ideology of white Christian nationalism. It means that when the Catholic Church speaks about race, it will always frame its words and initiatives in such a way as to not overly, unduly disturb the comfort of white people. The comfort of white Catholics outweighs the terror that people of color have to live with because of the racism of this country. I know that's a hard thing to say. I've been a priest 42 years. I don't do this in order to bash the church, but we've got to be honest. The second reason why Catholics and bishops have been kind of mute, anemic in terms of immigration justice is that Immigration is simply not a preeminent priority. That is the language that was used in the document from Faithful Citizenship, that document that's supposed to guide Catholic political discernment every 4 years for our election. They pointed out that among the many issues, it's abortion that is the preeminent priority. Preeminent priority, pastorally speaking, means that everything else gets a pass. Everything else gets a pass. Now, that's not what they say. That's how it's translated. And that means, therefore, that you can be a good Catholic. In fact, in many cases, I was actually told that I could not speak in several dioceses because I said back in 2008 that Catholics could, in good conscience, vote for President Obama. Because there is a widespread thinking in this country that if you vote anything other than Republican, you are supporting a culture of death. It also means that even when the USCCB speaks out about immigration or critiques the efforts of this administration, they always go out of their way to point out that, of course, we also are grateful for your stances against abortion and in favor of against gender ideology. What we need to understand is that as long as the administration is perceived or can be framed as being pro-life, then criticism of the administration is always going to be anemic, tepid, muted. So where do we go from here? I'm going to offer a short-term strategy, a medium-term approach, and a long-term approach. But first, I want to acknowledge where we are now. We are in a place of impasse in our country. And I'm taking that word impasse from the Carmelite scholar Connie Fitzgerald, who is a Baltimore Carmelite. And she uses impasse as a way of giving a contemporary reinterpretation of the classic and Christian spirituality of John of the Cross, the dark night of the soul. She says that we're in a dark night in our country. We're in a moment of impasse. That there seems to be no way out, no way around, no rational escape from what imprisons one, no possibilities. That impasse is experienced not only in the problem, but also in any solution. How many times have you talked about immigration and it seems like you're talking to a brick wall and you're not going anywhere? We're in a state of impasse. So what do we do? She says that in a state of impasse, your left brain, rational, analytical stuff completely fails us. We need to be open to new approaches. So I'm going to offer three: short-term, medium-term, long-term. Short-term, our principal goal in the short term, I believe, is harm reduction. We need to engage in ideas and strategies to reduce the negative consequences of injustice and abuse. We need to face the fact that we say our politics is broken. No, it's more than just broken. We are living in a period of time of authoritarian racial minority rule. Aggressive racial gender gerrymandering, voter suppression, manipulation of the judiciary. All of our standard ways of approaching the problems are not yielding a lot of solution. So we need to face the fact that people are being harmed and they're going to be harmed. Human beings are being damaged, and human damage is sinful. We don't use that word often enough. Human damage is sinful. We can't control damage, we can only mitigate it. And so at this point, I think our short-term goal is to do what we can, whether it's through accompaniment, whether it's through buying groceries, whether it's through protest, whether it's through escorting. All we can do is reduce the harm and to make what happens in the next 4 years merely a disaster and not a catastrophe. Now, that's pretty bleak, isn't it? But that's what we're up against. Our short-term goal, harm reduction. We can't stop all the harm. Our short-term goal is to reduce the damage. Our medium-term goal, and I'm going to put it this way, and I know people are going to get mad. Some of you are seeing your faces already. You're not happy. That's okay. I'm not here to make people happy. Otherwise, I mean, if you're not happy, join the crowd. I mean, a lot of people on the internet don't like me either. White people of conscience have got to start speaking out. %40 of you clapped, okay. White people of conscience and of goodwill have got to be more vocal and take the fight to where it is, to white Christians and their allies. That means speaking up and not letting racism go unchallenged. Many times our ways of dealing with polarizing issues, especially in our families, among our friends, and even in our religious communities, we deal with them by silence and evasion. We just don't talk about it, or we make excuses. That's just the way he is. That's how she talks. That's just how they were raised. Deep down, they're really a caring person. I understand the need and the desire to want to preserve good relationships with family and friends. But whenever white people are silent, you create a space for racism to fester. Now, why am I putting it on white people and saying, well, black people have problems too? I understand that. I know people are, and it always happens that way. But as I tell people, when I'm in the room, I tell my white students, I tell them, you're going to see and hear more raw racism than I will. Because when I'm in the room, everyone knows how to act. But what happens when I'm not in the room? My colleague, Puerto Rican Catholic ethicist M.T. Davila, gave a very helpful phrasing of the challenge and question and task at hand. How do we love those who hold unlovable positions? I love the phrasing of that question. How do we love those who hold unlovable positions? It is not loving to excuse dangerous, misguided, poisonous words and beliefs of family and friends, or let them let them pass in silence. We have to speak out. The next medium-term goal is that we have to help people grieve the loss of status, even if that status is unjust. We have to help people grieve the loss of unjust status and dominance. Remember what Walter Brueggemann said, that sadness unmourned and unprocessed, erupts in violence and precludes movement into the new. Feelings of status loss and marginalization, even if they're imagined, play a significant part in our national life. We need to help. There is room, let's put this bluntly, there is room for white Christian males in a multiracial, multi-faith society. I'm not trying to get rid of anybody. We need you all. I love you all. Some of my best friends are white Christian males. However, we cannot have that place by continuing a status of unjust preference. Identities are matters of the spirit. We have to help people grieve and mourn the passing of an America which, while it was unjust, is still held close. We need to develop public rituals of communal regret, mourning, and lament so that a new national identity can take place. That leads to the long-term goal. The long-term goal is a process of reconstructing our society, moving away from an America defined by a racial contract to developing a new civic covenant. The racial contract, I get that phrase from Charles Mills's book, where he says that America has been founded upon a premise that white, Christian, and American are interchangeable realities. We need to move to a civic covenant. We need to answer a way that the question that John Paul II raised when he said, the greatest challenge facing contemporary societies is this: how are we living together? And I use that language of covenant over contract because covenant resonates. How do we come to a new form of how we live together? A civic covenant that goes beyond faithful discipleship, but says that we are all truly living together as neighbors. That's a long-term prospect, but this is part of the work of immigration justice. In the short term, harm reduction. In a medium term, speaking out people of conscience. And in a third, engaging in this long-term process of social reconstruction to a new American identity. Hope. I'm going to be brief here because this is really personal. The key insight I want to share with you is this. You can't have hope as an individual. Hope is grounded in communities, in traditions of memory, in traditions of resistance and love. So when we look at the question of hope, we have to ask ourselves, what memories are we grounded in? To what traditions do we bear witness? These days, I am thinking and praying with my ancestors in faith. Because my ancestors in faith, signified by who we Black Catholics call the saintly six, the six that are on the road to canonization, they lived in America that we don't always talk about. We always think that this is the first time we lived in an authoritarian country. No. Black folks have lived in an authoritarian America for a whole long time. What was a Jim Crow South but an authoritarian fascist regime that was racially motivated? We don't teach it that way, but that's exactly what it was. And yet my ancestors in faith, our forebears in faith, because they're ours, were people who did amazing things in difficult and dangerous times. When their church said they were unwelcome, they founded their own religious orders. They created their own parishes. They made themselves welcome. When the Knights of Columbus said that Black people couldn't join the organization, we created the Knights and Ladies of St. Peter Claver and named it after a saint, the saint of racial justice. Who ever heard of St. Columbus? I pray with them because they give me an example of resilience and resistance. And they showed me that the present day circumstances we are in don't need to set the limits of our hope or our possibilities. The other image I pray with is that of being in a relay race. When you run a relay race, your goal isn't to be the one that breaks the tape at the end. Your goal is to run your best race and do your best work to honor those who went before you and for the sake of those who are coming after. We may not ever live in the church or the country that we are working for. That's not our task. We're called to be a part of a relay race, what we call in Catholic theology, the communion of saints, to do our best work, and then to trust that others will come afterwards. I'm going to conclude on this note. I was privileged last year to spend time in South Africa. I went there to study how Pope Francis's call to decriminalize homosexuality is being received in the African continent. And while in South Africa for a month, I met with LGBTQ refugees and migrants from across the continent who are fleeing to South Africa because it's the one place on the continent where LGBTQ issues are constitutionally protected. So I met migrants from Nigeria and from Ghana and from Somalia, and you're only going down to South Africa. You don't need to hold up about African geography, realize that ain't an easy journey. And I met with them at a house, a refugee house, and they were privileged to share with me their stories, their journey. One of them spoke about after her experience of corrective rape, and it means exactly what it says. I asked, why are you, what keeps you going? And she said, I do what I do for the younger me's out there. I do want them to have a better life than I did, to never go through what I had to. Sometimes I think we can learn hope from the people we're advocating for. I'm learning hope from these young refugees because hope can't be proved. It can only be witnessed. These are witnesses of hope. They don't think that they may ever see the justice they're working for, but they work in hope for the younger me's, for those who come after. I told you this wasn't going to be an easy talk. I hope it's been helpful. I hope it's been honest. I hope it's been real, because that's what we need at this time. And when you're down, look at these folks who braved a journey of thousands of miles, and they're still at it. And that means I have to stay at it too. And I invite you to do the same. Thank you.
Father Massingale, thank you so much. Extraordinary. Your presence, your prophecy, and your inspiration. So it's hard to know where to begin, but because I think we want to react and respond with a few questions from the group. I'm not sure where we are with time, so just someone can monitor that, but I think we'd like to do that.
Thank you so much for those words.
Where are you?
I'm right here.
Oh, right here. Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. They were inspirational and honest and hard, all of those things that you said. I have a very simple question about your medium-term goal. When you talked about public rituals of mourning, regret, and loss, I want to know what that would look like in a way that isn't racist, honestly, and that is honest and that gives space without taking all the space.
Well, one, I don't know. So this is a project that we're all going to work toward creating. But I take inspiration from the fact that during the struggle against apartheid in South Africa, one of the few places where white and black and colored South Africans could gather would be in the occasion of funerals. And so those funerals became not, and so when you had a funeral for an activist who had died, it became an occasion not simply to mourn the loss of an individual, but to mourn the condition of their country and what brought them to this point. And those rituals of mourning, I don't know quite, but I do, but the reason why I phrased it that way is because I think the temptation is always that if only we create the perfect academic paper or the perfect argument that will convince people. But we have to understand that identities are matters of the soul and spirit. And so we need to create these kinds of rites and rituals that can also speak to the soul and the spirit. So I don't know what that's going to look like. And frankly, I think that this is where white people of conscience need to come forward and to help develop these rites and rituals. And because I think the temptation is always to say, well, get someone like me to design it. And it's like, well, no. That this is work that we all need to do. And so I don't know what that's going to look like, but I hope that there are people out there who are intrigued by the idea and say, let's take a stab at it. Because again, we have rituals in our life. Go to a football game, we have rituals. But now how do we create those rituals that can speak to the kind of country that we want to be and to mourn who we are now? Maybe we need to start there. Let's mourn and grieve where we are. We're not very good at public grieving. By the way, the LCWR, the sisters group, they've taken this on as a major challenge. I can't get the CMSM, the men, to do that yet, but that's pretty typical. Yes, I'm saying that out loud. Yes, I did. That the women religious tend to be in the forefront of a lot of these issues. But again, these rites of mourning and lament and grieving, I think that's a really good place to start.
One more question.
Thank you. Thank you, Bryan. And you and I talked about this for a moment. And I think we've been having this conversation for a long time. So could you help us here to talk about how we move racism out of a black and white binary to include the brown, who have been left out of this conversation forever? Because last night you should have seen this picture here was here. These incredible women who have made journeys of thousands of miles, persisting with their children and their families. But they're the invisible, always the invisible. So how do we move past black, white to racism that includes people like them and like me?
That's a great question. One of the things I would do, and I would encourage bishops as individuals, as stake conferences, as even the corporate body, when they talk about race, when they talk about immigration, to talk about it as a racial issue. Because when you read Open Wide Our Hearts, which is their latest pastoral letter on the sin of racism, they talk about Latino immigrants as being victims of racism. But I have never seen a single document on immigration by a bishop that made any reference to Open Wide Our Hearts or to the sin of racism. It's like, we don't want to do that, because if we do that, we're going to alienate people. Well, again, if we're not honest about this, we're going to be ineffective. As I said, our enemies are intersectional. They don't have a problem with it, but we do. So what else do we need to do? I think we need to look at that statement that was made when Senator Padilla was arrested. He looked like an illegal. In other words, this is racial profiling. But we don't like using that word to talk about the kinds of enforcement efforts that are going on. The kinds of enforcement efforts that are happening in this nation are an example of an instance, a manifestation of racial profiling. That if you look a certain way, or if you sound a certain way, then you are a target. Not only a target, you're presumed to be here without documentation. And you're given scant kind of resources to prove otherwise. So I think one of the things we need to do is that we need to understand that I think one of the reasons why it's not put that way is because there is an allergy to using the word racism to talk about anything. I notice that even in this room, when I use the word, you can feel the tension in the room rise. You could. Let's be honest about that. But again, we are not going to move on this issue. Or we're going to keep, or to put it another way, we will be back here next year and the year after, and we will be lamenting, why hasn't anything changed? Because we're trying to treat a form of cancer without calling it a cancer. So that'd be really, these are real easy places to start. Using the language of racial profiling, I think, is an easy place to start. Using the language of racism in our own statements, whether by institutions or in our own treatment, using that language, going back to Open Wide Our Hearts and looking at that paragraph where it talks about immigration and clearly as a racial issue, we need to do that. Those are small places to start. It's a necessary beginning. And if someone calls it woke, I'm sorry, that just flowed through my head. I mean, if someone calls it woke, I'm going to say, what's wrong with being woke? Doesn't it say in scripture somewhere, awake, O sleeper, arise from the dead, and Christ will be your light? I mean, I think I read that somewhere in the Bible. Why do we always want to give the opposition, cede to them the territory? Let's take it back. I'm glad I'm awoke. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing at all wrong with that. And this is not about DEI, because DEI is the least we owe each other as Christians. It's the least we owe each other, a respect for our beauty and our diversity. Look around this room. No, I mean, that means he means it really turn your head and look. This is a microcosm of what heaven will look like. And we pray that God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So let's go about prizing, respecting, and demanding a respect for diversity, not as a political program, but as an exercise of our faith. This is our faith. And I'm not going to let someone tell me I can't practice my faith. They're pulling me away. Thank you for all the work you do.